Okay, so there are four functions of the lymphatic system. The first is to help maintain fluid balance in your body. So what happens is the lymphatic capillaries actually absorb excess fluid that's in your tissues, and they're going to return it to the bloodstream. So I'll show you a picture in a minute. Lymphatic capillaries, there's some special ones found in the small intestines that are called lacteals, and they're going to help us absorb fat. So they're going to take fat that you digest and help you absorb it and put it into your bloodstream. The lymphatic system is also going to help us make, maintain, and distribute lymphocytes throughout our body. So lymphocytes are a type of white blood cell. They're going to help us fight infection. So that leads us to the fourth thing, which is helps in defense against pathogens. Okay, so the components of the lymphatic system. So let's start with the tonsils. So the tonsils are big, but they're actually small patches of lymphatic tissue. They're at the opening in our mouth, so they're like kind of at the back of our throat. So the whole idea behind them is that they're going to help us help prevent pathogens from getting in through our nose and our mouth into our body. So they're full of white blood cells. If they're fighting infection, they get enlarged. That's why they feel bad, or you get them removed. The red bone marrow is found in long bones. It's also found in the skull, in the pelvic bones. Red bone marrow is where we're going to make all sorts of blood cells. So red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. The thymus is a gland, an organ that sits right on top of your heart. It's where these special white blood cells called T lymphocytes mature. In the thymus, that's where they learn to distinguish self from non-self. So your immune system should be able to tell your cells from a pathogen cells. That's important because you don't want your body to start attacking itself. So there's a big process that the cells go through before we actually let them, there's a big process that white blood cells go through before we actually let them into the bloodstream and out to fight pathogens. Okay, here's your spleen. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Lymph nodes. So lymph nodes are everywhere. We'll talk about what they do in a second. That's what all these little bean-looking things are. Those are all lymph nodes. There's a thoracic duct and a right lymphatic duct. So those are big ducts that are going to return the lymph to the bloodstream. Here's an example of a lymphatic capillary. It's a small one-way vessel. So it's not like an artery and a vein where you go out an artery and come back the vein. The lymph is only going to flow in one direction, back towards the heart. They have valves because they're under really low pressure. Okay, so here's more. So the lymphatic vessels are a one-way system that have valves. Okay, and they carry fluid called lymph. Lymph fluid is kind of clear. In all the pictures in the books, they always represent it as green, but it's actually clear. The lymphatic system is made of really small capillaries, and then they merge and dump into larger vessels, and then those vessels dump into ducts. The idea is that it's going to absorb fluid from your tissue, and it's going to return it to the bloodstream so that you don't have water hanging out when you should be using it. Okay, the large lymphatic vessels are really similar to veins because they're under low pressure. So they have valves. The pressure in them is very low. So the more you move, so the skeletal muscle pump, respiratory pump, those will help return the lymph to your bloodstream. So the more you move, really the healthier you are because the lymph is moving and the lymph is being cleansed by the lymph nodes. Okay, so here's the different kinds of lymphatic organs. So there's primary and secondary. Primary is made up of the red bone marrow and the thymus gland. And then the secondary are the lymph nodes and the spleen. Okay, so they're full of blood cells. Okay, so the red bone marrow is important because that's where we make all sorts of blood cells, red, white, platelets. Okay, when you're little, when you're a kid, the bones actually have more red bone marrow in them, but as we age, it becomes yellow or white bone marrow, so it doesn't produce as many blood cells. White blood cells can mature there, so it's really important. Okay, the thymus gland is a gland, they say it's bilobed, so it's got two lobes. It's in your thoracic cavity. It sits on top of your heart. It's also big in children and shrinks as we get older. So what's important about it is it's where these cells, these white blood cells called T lymphocytes, mature. So the T lymphocytes are actually made in the red bone marrow, and then they migrate to the thymus. They're going to stay in the thymus until they're mature, and we know that they won't attack self. Okay, the lymph nodes. So lymph nodes are considered secondary lymphatic organs. They're little small. They're almost like little peas. Okay, they're oval shaped. They're all along the lymphatic vessels, and what's going to happen is the blood's going to flow. If I go back here, the lymph is going to flow, and it's going to go through all of the lymph nodes on its way back to the heart. So each lymph node has B cells, T cells, and macrophages in there, and they're going to destroy pathogens. So it's kind of like a filter. Lymph nodes, we have them in our neck, in our armpit, in our groin. They're going to get bigger when you're fighting infections. So think about if you have a cold or a sore throat, what happens to the lymph nodes in your neck? Okay, so they get bigger. It's just interesting. Okay, now the spleen, so that's in the upper left region of your abdomen. And the spleen is made up of white pulp, and the white pulp has white blood cells in it, lymphocytes. And the red pulp is going to have red blood cells in it, and it's also going to filter the blood. So the spleen, you can live without a spleen. The spleen's important in, it has white blood cells in there, so it's going to be important. They say if you don't have your spleen, you might be more prone to infections. It's also like a little stockpile of red blood cells too. Okay, now I'm going to stop here. Oops, sorry. I'm going to stop here, and then when we come back, we'll talk about the defense system.